Welcome to the audio presentation of The Ethical Alpinist, Grace in the Mountains Over Glory on Social Media. I'm Dr. Chris Stout, and I'll be reading this, and I'm also the author of it. And please be sure to look at the show notes to this for a variety of links and resources. Thanks for listening. At first glance, you may not think this has much to do with LinkedIn readers' interests or something written by a LinkedIn top voice, but I see a number of parallels with which I want to think out loud with you about. First off, leadership. That's a dominant gene in LinkedIn's DNA. Also, from my point of view, in business and startups, of which I have some experience, every project worth its salt addresses a problem in need of a solution, or an established enterprise that wants to grow needs to have the benefit of strong leadership, good planning, the ability to pivot if and when need be, manage risk, and be able to prepare and execute. There is also a need to be able to coordinate and manage teams and to be able to be of support during adverse conditions. Another thing about leadership is that you need to respect and appreciate the environment in that you and your team are working in. To me, that sounds a lot like mountaineering. Parallels with my field of global health. Mountaineering is quite similar to working on global health problems. Both involve big and seemingly insurmountable tasks. Both take the help of others in order to reach the goal. Both deal with risks, and both require large doses of planning, teamwork, concentrated effort, and hope. I believe what makes the difference in all these situations, what is predicated and built upon a strong foundation, is that of ethics and doing what's right. As of the time of this writing, the lack thereof seems to be very topical in the business press, with so many high-profile founder flameouts and fraudsters as of late. I just read a piece by Ben Ayers, who is a journalist who knows what he's talking about, titled "The Speed Demons and Selfie Seekers at the Top of the World." He also references John Krakauer's cautionary tale, Into Thin Air. Seems a lot of rich folks may have not read it. Ethics and ethos. I get it. Record setting and breaking is cool and impressive. I've had Colin O'Brady on my podcast twice, and Olympic medalist John Coyle. The difference for them is that they put in the work, and even doing so, stuff happens, as Colin shares in his K2 disaster, where he lost a fellow climbing teammate. Competition can be different in extreme endeavors or sports. For example, it's not unusual during an ultra run that if someone needs help, another runner who is a competitor will lend a hand. Likewise, in non-competitive climbing and expeditions, the stakes can literally be life and death. I've dabbled in some organized ultra-distance races as well as self-supported runs, but in the former, it also seems that there is no doping in ultras. Perhaps that's due to the nature of the athletes, or to the kind of person who's drawn to ultra running, or perhaps that there's no cutthroat competition for sponsor monies, as there is not really much. I've also attended car and motorcycle land speed racing events where the same camaraderie exists between competitors. Folks willingly share tools, parts, and often lend a hand with doing repairs on others' machines. I hope mountaineering will never lose its comradeship and camaraderie, but that when record breaking and setting starts to factor into the equation, I do get worried. Bagging peaks or bagging followers? A long time ago, and in all honesty, this was pre-social media's existence. My wife said, "Would you climb X if you couldn't tell anybody about it?" I really thought about that, and I concluded that, in fact, I would. In fact, I had never had the hubris to think that I would always summit everything that I attempted. So yes, I would climb regardless of others knowing about it. Back when I got started, I did not carry an extra ounce of gear, so no cameras or film ever went up with me anyway. You can't cram for a climb, can you? On a personal note, when I got into climbing, it was to be in nature, to have a personal challenge. I like the travel. An upcoming expedition was a motivator for me to develop my skills in learning proper techniques, mastering ropes and knots, getting education on managing the gear, and doing proper planning, running, aerobic capacity building, and strength training. Ayres quotes Simone Moreau, who said, "The old style and old community attempting the 8,000-meter peaks doesn't exist anymore, and many of today's climbers are learning to climb while they are on the mountain." That's a concern, not just from an ethics of being on the mountain and having respect for where you are, but also for the safety of the climber and those supporting them. I suppose I may have a bit of a competitive streak or that I'm simply jealous, but if I make comparisons, is it that I'm a better athlete or climber, or is it that I can afford a step-saving helicopter approach or a hypoxic tent or a team to carry me up? It's not my intention to be the judgy mountain police, but perhaps it's time to take a step back and re-examine our own personal motivations for climbing and consider how our actions support or counter the wholesome cultural aspects of alpinism. I have a great deal of respect for world-class Conrad Anker, who argues that, quote, "the speed records that are the latest expression of a dynamic that has existed in the mountains for decades. Climbers must sustain the interest of the public and attract the financial backing that their expeditions would be impossible without." Close quote. Okay, fair point, Conrad. But I bet he's not endorsing anyone being on the mountains without putting in the work or earning it on their own efforts and merits. Is it cheating? No one likes someone having an unfair advantage. No one is a fan of doping. But where do we draw the line in climbing? Should we compare Diamox with HGH? What about climbing with or without supplemental oxygen? How about fixed ropes? Are helicopters acceptable, or should folks just climb in? I don't have any great answers other than considering classifying climbing by noting the different support tools one does, such as supplemental oxygen or not. Is less more? I'm not supporting a throwback to hobnail boots rather than double plastic, for example. But when is it that a speedy summit record is more so a Pyrrhic victory because of all of the hacks used and the other lives put at risk? My personal philosophy and backstory. When I took up mountaineering and climbing very much as the amateur, I originally set out to do the 7 summits, reaching the top of the highest mountains on each of the 7 continents. I've been fortunate to have summited 3 of the easy ones, Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, Mount Elbrus in Europe, which was really in Russia, and Mount Kosciuszko in Australia. I've also made it to the tops of Mount Whitney, the highest peak in the continental United States, via the Mountaineers route, which was no easy task, Yosemite's Half Dome with the Cables route, Mount Rainier, and actually even Adams Peak in Sri Lanka to see the sunrise. Having a penchant for challenges and wanting to help others, having a background in working on international humanitarian aid and medical service projects, and being a tad bit creative and enjoying climbing, I founded Summits for Others. The idea being that with every climb I do as a fundraiser for the nonprofit Center for Global Initiatives, in order to raise not only funds but also awareness of the projects that we're involved with. While this may seem hypocritical, maybe hypocritical as well too, in the context that I have been harping on, I suppose that part of my thinking is that my training and preparation in climbing seem like an alone thing, with the exception of going on with my partners. But also, I put in the work, and I train, and I prepare. And while it'd be nice, I've never been carted up. I'm more so the fan of the proverbial dirtbag approach over the more expensive hack style. And climbing became a family thing as well. I built a pretty comprehensive climbing wall in our home to play and practice on, including campus rungs, quick draws, the ability to rope up and belay. As a high schooler, my son became co-captain of his high school climbing club. My daughter and I have climbed Inspiration Point in the Grand Teton National Park and Colorado's Pikes Peak. And our family did Mount Lumagia, which I'm sure I've mispronounced, together. Someone once said, "No summit can change who you are. It merely changes the way you see you are." I've learned of the power of the individual and the collective team, the power and the importance of my family and faith, and the many metaphorical parallels, easy for me to say, of climbing applied to living. After being in the mountains, I bring back the typical trinkets to family and friends, but for myself, I bring back more personal souvenirs of hope, inspiration, and renewal. I cannot for the life of me think this is also true for those who are just doing it for the likes and the followers. Perhaps my point is simply to consider that it is important to be mindful of one's motivations for action, to consider and weigh different ways of doing things, and for the concomitant results. My bias is that authenticity comes from the introspection one has while in the mountains, and even in the preparation before. If you'd like to learn more and connect, please do. I have a variety of links in here. I discuss and show stuff around Summits for Others, our Consortium for Humanitarian Intervention, the new tool for humanitarian emergency medical kits, etc. So I apologize for my stumbles and foibles in presenting this, but this is not NPR. It's just me, Dr. Chris Stout. And again, thanks for listening.